September 27th, 1963, 10:17 a.m. Joseph Michael Valachi, soldier in the Genovese crime family, sat before the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the caucus room of the Senate office building. Television cameras rolled as millions of Americans watched the first Cosa Nostra member to publicly break the code of silence. For the next 18 days, Valachi would name names, reveal organizational structures, and expose criminal operations that had remained hidden for decades. He would detail the inner workings of La Cosa Nostra, identify hundreds of made men, and provide evidence that would lead to hundreds of prosecutions. But in 683 pages of testimony, in 18 days of sworn statements, in the most comprehensive exposure of organized crime in American history, Joseph Valachi never once mentioned the name Bumpy Johnson. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't a gap in knowledge. This was the result of the most sophisticated protection arrangement in the history of organized crime, a deal so secret that even the man who exposed America's crime families didn't dare violate it. The question wasn't why Joe Valachi exposed the mafia. The question was why the most powerful black crime figure in America remained invisible to the most damaging informant in mob history. To understand why Bumpy Johnson's name never appeared in the Valachi papers, you need to understand what led Joseph Valachi to become the most famous informant in organized crime history. June 22, 1962. 14 months before Valachi's Senate testimony, Vito Genovese made a decision that would destroy American organized crime forever. From his cell in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where he was serving 15 years for narcotics conspiracy, Genovese ordered the murder of Joseph Valachi. The reason was simple. Genovese suspected Valachi of being a federal informant. The suspicion was wrong, but the consequences would be catastrophic for every crime family in America. Valachi, terrified for his life and facing a murder contract from his own boss, made the decision that would change everything. On September 18, 1962, he contacted federal authorities and offered to provide information about La Cosa Nostra in exchange for protection. What federal investigators received was beyond their wildest expectations. Valachi didn't just provide information about his own family. He provided a comprehensive organizational chart of American organized crime, naming bosses, underbosses, lieutenants, and soldiers across 24 crime families. But there was one name that federal investigators expected to hear that never came up in any of Valachi's debriefings. Bumpy Johnson. October 15, 1962. FBI agent James Flynn conducted his 43rd interview with Joseph Valachi. The subject was independent operators and their relationships with established crime families. "Tell us about the black criminals in New York," Agent Flynn requested. "Who controls Harlem?" Valachi's response was surprising. "Harlem? That's not our thing. We don't operate there. But surely there are connections, tribute arrangements, territorial agreements? No connections. Harlem runs itself." Agent Flynn pressed further. "What about Bumpy Johnson? He's been identified as the primary criminal figure in Harlem." Joseph Valachi looked directly at the FBI agent and said, "I never heard that name." It was a lie so obvious that Flynn noted it in his report. Subject clearly has knowledge of Bumpy Johnson, but refuses to discuss. Possible protection arrangement, suspected. What Agent Flynn didn't know was that Joseph Valachi's refusal to discuss Bumpy Johnson wasn't just personal loyalty. It was the result of a protection arrangement that had been established 15 years earlier, long before Valachi became an informant, long before anyone suspected he would betray La Cosa Nostra. The arrangement dated back to 1948, when Bumpy Johnson had saved Joseph Valachi's life. March 3, 1948, Joseph Valachi was supposed to die. He'd been marked for execution by Frank Costello for skimming money from numbers operations in the Bronx. The contract was legitimate, the evidence was solid, and Valachi had no defense. That's when Bumpy Johnson intervened. The meeting took place at Rao's restaurant, with Costello, Valachi, and Bumpy present. What Bumpy revealed changed everything. "Mr. Costello, Joseph wasn't skimming your money. Vincent Romano was skimming your money and setting up Joseph to take the blame. Bumpy provided documentation, financial records, witness statements, and most importantly, photographs of Vincent Romano meeting with federal agents. Romano's been feeding information to the FBI for 8 months. He's not just a thief, he's a rat. The evidence was overwhelming. Frank Costello realized he'd been planning to execute an innocent man while the real culprit, a federal informant, remained free. Vincent Romano was killed that night. Joseph Valachi was cleared of all charges, and Bumpy Johnson earned something more valuable than money: the eternal gratitude of a future federal informant. Before leaving Rao's restaurant, Bumpy made a simple request. "Joseph, if you ever find yourself in a position to help or hurt me, remember tonight." 15 years later, when Joseph Valachi sat before Senate investigators, he remembered. December 20th, 1962. Bumpy Johnson received an unexpected visitor at Small's Paradise. Agent James Flynn of the FBI wanted to discuss Joseph Valachi's testimony and Bumpy's notable absence from it. "Mr. Johnson, we know you operate in Harlem. We know you have connections throughout organized crime. We find it strange that Joseph Valachi claims never to have heard of you." Bumpy's response was characteristic. "Agent Flynn, maybe Mr. Valachi just doesn't get around Harlem much. Mr. Johnson, we have evidence of your criminal activities going back 20 years. We have documentation of meetings with crime family figures. We know you're not invisible." Bumpy leaned back in his chair. "Agent Flynn, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking why the most comprehensive organized crime testimony in American history doesn't include the most powerful black criminal in New York. Maybe because I'm not part of organized crime. Maybe because I run a legitimate business. Or maybe because Mr. Valachi is telling you exactly what he wants you to know." The conversation ended without resolution. But Agent Flynn's suspicions were confirmed. There was a protection arrangement between Bumpy Johnson and Joseph Valachi that superseded federal cooperation. What Flynn couldn't prove was how deep the arrangement went. January 15th, 1963. 8 months before Valachi's public testimony, Bumpy Johnson received detailed advance information about everything Valachi would reveal to the Senate subcommittee. The source was Valachi himself, communicating through federal marshals who had been secretly on Bumpy's payroll for years. The information allowed Bumpy to prepare for the unprecedented scrutiny that Valachi's testimony would bring to organized crime. Business operations were restructured. Documentation was destroyed. Associates were relocated. Most importantly, Bumpy coordinated with other independent operators to ensure that Valachi's testimony, while devastating to Italian crime families, would not impact Black, Irish, or Jewish criminal organizations. September 27, 1963. When Joseph Valachi began his public testimony, Bumpy Johnson was sitting in his office above Small's Paradise, listening to the radio broadcast and checking off names from a list of people Valachi had promised to expose. For 18 days, Valachi delivered exactly what he'd promised: comprehensive exposure of Italian-American organized crime, with no mention of independent operators who had earned his protection. The Valachi hearings destroyed the secrecy that had protected La Cosa Nostra for decades. Crime family bosses across America found themselves facing federal indictments based on Valachi's testimony. But independent operators like Bumpy Johnson emerged stronger than ever. With Italian crime families under intense federal scrutiny, independent organizations filled the power vacuum. October 15, 1963. The Valachi hearings concluded. The impact was immediate and devastating for traditional organized crime. 347 federal indictments based on Valachi's testimony. 23 crime family bosses faced prosecution. Cosa Nostra operations disrupted nationwide. Public awareness of organized crime structure increased dramatically. Meanwhile, independent operators reported their most profitable year in decades. With Italian families under investigation, Black, Irish, and Jewish criminal organizations expanded into territories that had been closed to them for generations. November 3, 1963. Bumpy Johnson met with Joseph Valachi one final time. Valachi was being transferred to a secure federal facility where he would spend the rest of his life in protective custody. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. No federal agents were present. No recording devices captured the conversation. But according to sources close to both men, the meeting consisted of a simple exchange. Valachi, I kept my promise. Bumpy, I'll keep mine. The promise Bumpy made was that Joseph Valachi's family would be protected and provided for as long as Bumpy lived. When Valachi died in federal custody in 1971, 3 years after Bumpy's death, his widow received a monthly payment that continued until her death in 1987. The source of the payments was never identified, but investigators suspected it was part of an arrangement that had protected America's most powerful black crime figure from the most damaging testimony in organized crime history. Years later, when crime historians analyzed the Valachi papers, they noted that the absence of any mention of independent black operators was the most significant omission in the testimony. The Italian crime families that Valachi exposed never recovered their pre-1963 power. Federal scrutiny, combined with internal conflicts and changing demographics, permanently weakened their control over American organized crime. But the black criminal organizations that Valachi never mentioned continued to operate and expand for decades after his testimony. Joseph Valachi had kept his promise to the man who saved his life 15 years earlier. In return, Bumpy Johnson had remained invisible to the most comprehensive organized crime investigation in American history. The Valachi papers became the foundation for federal organized crime prosecutions for the next 2 decades, but they also became proof that the most effective protection wasn't violence or intimidation. The arrangement between Bumpy Johnson and Joseph Valachi demonstrated that in the criminal underworld, personal honor could be more powerful than federal cooperation agreements. Valachi had been willing to destroy La Cosa Nostra, but he would not betray the man who had saved his life. The irony was perfect. The most comprehensive exposure of organized crime in American history had protected its most significant omission through the oldest code in the criminal world: loyalty to those who had earned it. Sometimes, the most effective protection was a debt of honor, paid by silence when silence was worth more than testimony. Look, if this protection arrangement masterpiece got your mind blown, smash that like button. Could you have kept silent about the most powerful crime figure you knew?